Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Center. I'm part of our cloud sales strategy team here at Atlassian. So pumped to be back in person with all of you, so thank you so much for coming today. Who here remembers their first car? Anyone? Yeah, a lot of us do, right? Here's mine, this beauty, 2001 Toyota Corolla, and I'm sure we all remember, as I was first learning to drive, this was perfect. But I started getting older, and my transportation needs started changing. And with that, so did my standards for what I actually wanted in a car. Not to mention, we started comparing to what all of our friends were driving. We started noticing how much time I had to have the car in the shop for maintenance, and I didn't know how much longer I could tolerate on the highway. Every time I go over 50 miles an hour, the car would start shaking violently. But I began my long overdue search, and I realized a couple things. First was, we all poured some blood, sweat, and tears into those first cars, right? It was going to be hard to part with something I had spent so long taking care of. And I also knew that this new car was going to be a lot more expensive than what this was worth. Now, after some deep reflection, I had to get real with myself. I knew, ultimately, my time and money was going to be a lot better spent in something newer, more modern, and better suited for my future needs. Plus, how fair was it really for me to compare two cars from two completely different decades? Now, some of you might see where I'm headed here, or you might think I'm some car fanatic, which I assure you I am not. But just like me, all of you here today are on some journey of growth of your own, and not just with Atlassian tools, but at your organizations in general. And investing in modern platforms that fit your current and future needs is a key part of that journey. Now, with Atlassian's cloud platform specifically, a lot of times that investment might be a lot higher up front than what you might be paying or what you might be used to paying. But just like I found in my car search, Atlassian's cloud platform offers a whole new opportunity to rethink how your teams actually use the Atlassian tools, more importantly, how they support your business. Now, many of you today are already exploring a cloud migration at your own companies, or maybe just looking for tips to drive some other strategic initiative. And regardless, though, I'm here today to help equip you to build a strong case in advocating for positive change. By the time you walk out of here today, I hope you can understand what really goes into a strong case. I hope you can draw from examples of Atlassian customers who have already made this journey, seeing both expected and unexpected benefits that you all can leverage in your own planning process. And I hope you walk away feeling inspired to drive meaningful change for you, your teams, and your organizations. Quick poll here today. I know you all have heard a heavy cloud theme, but want to take a quick poll. Who here today is already using Atlassian's cloud tools? Okay, it looks like about half. And who here today is on server and data center, self-hosted? Okay, all right, you came to the right place. Now, regardless of which deployment you're on today, all of us can obviously recognize the critical role that SaaS has played in transforming all of our industries, right, and how we work. No better than in the last few years as we've evolved and shifted to a more hybrid workforce. And so this list isn't groundbreaking. It shouldn't surprise anyone, and that's not why we're here today. In fact, a lot of you today are already leveraging SaaS technology in other areas. Atlassian might be one of the few vendors that are still on-prem. And you might expect this. This is table stakes for SaaS vendors that you're talking to. But you're asking, Ben, what's the point? Right? How does this list actually help me? And honestly, I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you, because it's one of the most common questions we get from customers who are evaluating cloud. And it totally should be. I mean, look, if you're going to be sponsoring a multi-year initiative of this magnitude, then you want to be as sure as possible that it'll succeed. Because when you do make that decision, it's a high-risk, high-reward type of initiative, right? Puts you in the spot, leadership, but also all those cross-functional stakeholders, including all those end users that you're supporting who are just one click away from bombarding your inbox with everything that's going wrong, right? But is this really the right question to be asking? I want to challenge you all to think about this a little bit differently. And this is a subtle shift, but it's important, and I'll explain why. Everyone here today has the opportunity here to do something significant. Because Atlassian designed our cloud architecture on a totally independent environment, that means that this migration is not just a simple project of lifting up everything you have on-prem and moving it over. It requires intensive planning and robust testing that can take months or even years. But what that also means is the result in a successful execution, and it was successful, I assure you, a transformational shift for your business. We've heard from customers time and time again that this opens doors to new possibilities, right? Happier, more productive users, plus all those IT teams are actually optimizing their time by shedding all of those tasks and managing an on-prem environment. Now, I said this, and I'll say it again, it does take time and effort. But what we see is that the long-term strategic return to your business exponentially outweighs any potential cost delta you might see up front. And we're going to get into that more. But how do we get there? I've painted this rosy picture of once you're in cloud and all the beautiful results that you'll see. We know that one of the biggest steps and one of the most difficult steps is convincing leadership, and let's be honest, sometimes convincing ourselves that this is worthwhile. And not just worthwhile in general, because the inevitability that we've been hearing about this week is eventually we will be in cloud, but that it's worthwhile today, right, and to start now. Because once we make that realization, it requires cross-functional alignment, change management, clear communication, and a vision for where you actually want to go. And that vision is what we're going to dive into, because that's what drives a strong justification here. Now, many of you might think this first when you think about business case. Features. What's different? And that's okay. That's a good start. Because there are plenty of features in cloud that are not and will never be available on server and data center, I'm sorry to say. And a lot of our future innovation is also going to be exclusively dedicated to cloud, but that's not really what drives support from other teams in supporting a migration. That's not necessarily what drives a strategic initiative to modernize tooling. No, it's not quite enough. Here's what we really need to do. Take those features, combine those with actual outcomes that we're trying to drive, and think about the business benefits that a migration can accelerate for your business. Now look, I'm biased. Okay, I'm on the Atlassian team. I'm behind the scenes. I don't have my t-shirt on today, but I assure you, I'm behind the scenes, and I get to see all of those cool things that we're building for customers in cloud. To hear from all of those customers who have made that journey about all these incredible benefits they're seeing. But still, I understand I'm the Atlassian guy, so this is kind of my thing. So don't just take it from me. In fact, I finally get to fulfill a long-term dream of mine, or at least pretend to fulfill, of being a talk show host and bring on a surprise special guest. Yes, that's right. He might be a celebrity in the Atlassian universe, but I'm going to give him the talk show host introduction anyways. This senior manager of collaboration tools just helped Splunk migrate over 10,000 users to cloud and is now driving the new ways of working. So please, everyone, give me a warm welcome in bringing Greg Warner up to the stage. Now, as Greg joins us, he's going to be talking about how Splunk built their initial business case, but more importantly, what he actually found once they were in cloud that you all can now leverage. Greg, so happy to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Thank you.
So I want to set the stage here a little bit, because a lot of people here today, you saw how many people are still on self-hosted tools. And so I want to rewind over 2 years ago to when we first started chatting about this potential, right? And you weren't necessarily sold on cloud, right? Like a lot of people we talked to here, there was some skepticism. So tell me a little bit about where your head was when we first started chatting about the viability of this.
If you want to talk about not completely sold, a bit of background. I've been involved with Atlassian since about 2006, and I wrote some of the questions for the certification program at DC and server. So I'm a server guy way back, right? So in 2020, we were in our own data centers, and there was a business strategic driver, which is to minimize our own data center footprint. And that meant, for me, right, I'd come from Amazon, right? It was like, okay, we're going to go to AWS. I know this backwards. Like, I know how we're going to move this. This is not a big deal. And so that was the plan, to move it to AWS, to still be self-hosted, and to continue as we were. Continue with the white Corolla, if you like. But you know, the thing with that is, though, like, I had a challenge from our CIO, which was like, have you considered Atlassian Cloud? So, but to build the business case, though, what we were looking at was, what does it cost us today? What does it cost us both in our own compute, storage, licensing, Yeah, so our business case was really just based on moving from on-prem to cloud, right? And compare that with what it would cost it to do it self-hosted.
Yeah. So when you initially kind of made that mental shift after getting challenged from the CIO, how did you think about what cloud could potentially unlock when we initially had started having those conversations?
Yeah, those conversations were challenging, and it was challenging because people within the team were vulnerable, right? If we moved to Atlassian Cloud, we could lose our jobs, right? I remember drawing on the whiteboard how we're going to do this, and having one of my staff members ask me that question, and I said, I'm actually thinking the same thing, right? But if we don't get on board with what we're seeing the rest of the business do, we're seeing them already move from Exchange to Gmail and to Slack and to other SaaS services. We were even encouraging our own customers to move from Splunk self-hosted to our SaaS offering. Like, why were we any different? We're the laggards here, right? And so, yeah, when your CIO asks you that question, there's probably a much bigger question they're asking you. And if you don't get on board with it, eventually the business will just navigate around you, right? So it was a big shift. It took me about 4 weeks to actually give that answer to our CIO, because immediately when he asked me, I could have just said a bunch of technical reasons why we won't do this. The thing with technical problems is that they can be solved with engineering solutions, all right? So yeah, you got to get out of the way. So it was a shift for me, and so we just looked at, okay, what's it going to cost us to just simply move, and then just do a like for like, just thinking it was just going from one product self-hosted to the same product in cloud.
Cool. So once you actually made that shift, I want to fast forward now, because Splunk's about 6 months live post-migration, and you've seen a lot of amazing things. So you had that business case initially to convince leadership to buy in and make that investment, right?
Yep.
But tell us a little bit about what you were actually able to see initially. What was that initial reaction from the teams after making that migration?
Yes, we were very fixed on our vision that in cloud, everything had to be better. Like, it had to be, that's the reason we're going to do it, right? And the core things had to work. Now, one of the things I didn't realize until after we had done it and after people were using it, that the data was more accessible and usable by our end users. Like, we had it self-hosted. Yeah, we've got corporate networking teams, and we can run firewall rule changes and build outside services that connect to the corporate network. But our internal teams aren't necessarily customer-facing teams, right? So our corporate network team, who would do all those firewall changes, so we could cut a hole in the firewall and let some other service connect in, they don't necessarily work 24/7, right? But when you move to cloud, it becomes more usable. Now, when we started our cloud migration, we had 76 integrations, right? After our cloud migration, we got more than 100, because people were able to build things from it that they couldn't do previously. Now, I didn't predict that, right? And it was when I started to see people start to request API keys and start to build these things that I realized that it simply wasn't possible in DC. And I wouldn't advise anyone to keep doing that way. And so certainly from our end users, we have this Slack montage of when it became available of like, this is a first world experience. Like, it's simply different in a better way. It's an inherently better product. This is where it's hard for somebody who's been involved with the server for so long to say that cloud is better. But
it's like letting go of that old car.
It is like, I remember sitting there on the Wednesday and I realized we'd done this, and like, it is better. Like, you have to accept it that there are just simply things that won't happen in DC ever. And so we've gone from being that customer that looks at when is that feature coming to on-prem to being that customer who's using it in cloud and using it. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of using some of those features, I'm curious if you could share with us some specific examples of where Splunk's been able to see that unexpected or expected value that you might not have planned for after migration.
Yeah, so one of the things that became really apparent during our migration was we had these two big integrations, one to do with Salesforce and one to do with use of our product roadmaps. And it became clear that once we moved to cloud, it would be better to shift all those product roadmaps to Jira Advanced Roadmaps. And so we did that, like 9,000 items came in. So you can have an integration, but it's still better if it's in the product. And so we moved from one product to Advanced Roadmaps. We had Log4j. Who remembers Log4j at the end of last year, right? There was a lot of scrambling just before Christmas. This is probably the one time when I was asked by my boss, who's sitting right here in the front row, is like, how are we with Log4j? And so I asked our TAM, and I logged a support request, and then the response came back with it's all taken care of. Now, I know my counterparts down the road at a rather large media streaming company spent 4 days, right? I didn't. None of our team did. So that was probably the first time we saw the value in completely offloading that to Atlassian and using their considerable scale and dealing with this for us, right? We've got one at the moment where we're asked the same thing, where we simply just don't have to deal with it. And I guess the realization there is that we spent a lot of time dealing with the plumbing. And so in the business case, we factored in like how many upgrades do we do a year, and it's usually 2 for each product. So that's 4 upgrades a year, and that usually takes roughly 1 person month worth of labor a year. So immediately you get that time back. We don't worry about it anymore.
Yeah, that's 4 months.
4 months. Like,
Yeah.
Think about that in your business case, right? I know that we looked at, speaking to you about like not only the incremental license costs over time, and with the proposal we had, by year 4, it was actually more expensive to stay on-prem than it was to go to cloud. So clearly, now we've got a better product that can do more, that was now equal or less than the cost of just doing nothing at all. Right. It surprised me, and this is why I'm happy to speak to things like this, because I'm looking at those customers who are right now thinking about how we're going to move it, and how we're going to do it, and how we're going to get set up. So, but there's other things too, like Team Central, now Atlas, that came along that we had access to. So during our cloud migration, we used that to make sure we had everyone on the same page. And again, just simply not available. Mobile access is one that really took off. Again, we couldn't provide it because we didn't have access back to corporate infrastructure. And so we've had anecdotes of where the work changed. Like the work was no longer limited to a Splunk-owned device. Mm-hmm. They could do it mobile. But yeah, we don't wait for those features anymore. That's probably the best thing is we see it and then we've got it and then off we go.
Right.
And so our users are now seeing those constant updates of new features and functionality.
Right. So what happened? You were telling us about that meeting when you were whiteboarding with your team, and people were sharing concerns, which I'm sure are common with a lot of people here because it requires a big shift, right?
Yep.
How has that changed now that you all are actually operating?
Yeah, that's a good one. You have this vulnerability, and then the actual result of that is of our team of 4. 2 of those people in the last 12 months have been promoted, and they've been promoted because of this work, because they took on a hard project. And they took on these hard deliverables, but their value shifted, again, from doing the plumbing to actually, that roadmaps example is one where a team member of mine who had experience in that from previous job, she's like, I know this, I've got this. And so that became something in her promotion packet of work that she'd done, right? And so, yeah, we don't do the plumbing, but we've now got promotions in the team. The team is still the same size, but they're doing much higher value work. Mm-hmm. So much so, though, right? We still have a very small footprint of on-prem, and it's mainly for FedRAMP and IL5. And that is so low value that no one wants to touch it, because I could do something that was only going to affect 200 people, or I could get involved in cloud, which is going to affect over 10,000 people. And so you realize now how low value that on-prem really was previously, right? Like you're not delivering the same higher outcomes to those end users.
I think it's common for a lot of customers in IT in particular to assume that with a move to cloud, there's an elimination, a reduction, right? A cutoff in resources that need to be dedicated to Atlassian. And from your example, it sounds like it's the total opposite, right? It's not necessarily a reduction or elimination, it's a reallocation, right? It's more of a shift.
Yeah. All right.
New mic for you.
Okay. All right.
So were you thinking about that? Because I remember there were 2 elements to this, right? The first was, I remember Splunk CIO at the time was telling us that when they were planning to allocate headcount, initially you were actually looking to double your team, right? Because specifically for some of those plumbing responsibilities, and the user base was going to grow that you needed to support, right?
Yeah. But it's still the same 4.
Right.
We have leveraged automation to do a lot of the work we need to do that we couldn't do before. We are making sure that we root cause and solve a problem first, and then we don't have to do it again. But yeah, simply like, it's just less work. Like we're able to focus on the things that matter. We don't need to do the plumbing. I think that's probably the best thing at all. But I speak to teams here, and they're same thing again. They're like, am I going to lose my job? No, you're not going to lose your job, but you're going to get a better job, and it's going to be much more entertaining for you. Like it's going to be the work you want to come to every day. So it's still the same headcount. Yeah,
that's powerful. So, all right, I wanted to leave with some takeaways here for people. Hopefully you've gotten some powerful examples from Splunk situations in particular. Obviously, all of your situations are unique and your scenarios are different. So, the roadmap example is probably a little bit more unique to Splunk, but that that tool consolidation and reconciliation, I'm sure, applies to a lot of you here. But Greg, so for these people who are thinking about how to start building a business case or how to strengthen that business case, how would you advise them to think about things differently based on your experience?
Yeah, if I had my time again, the migration is not the end of your business case, okay? The migration just happens to be one event in a story, right? And it's like all stories, the business case has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the middle bit is your migration. It's when you move to cloud, but then there's this amplification of things that you can do that you just couldn't do possibly, and that should be in your business case, right? So for us, it's the higher value work. We have services that people have built since they couldn't do before. One of those services saves 8,600 hours a month, right? Couldn't do it before. And as our teams have seen the reliability and accessibility that I mentioned before, they're able to build services that are reliable on that because cloud, we're leveraging Atlassian's considerable scale in this area. So yes, so certainly consider those. Like don't make your business case a technical change from on-prem to cloud and then we're done. Because I've learned from this, when I've looked back at it, that there are just so many things you can do, and we're seeing it every day of the being able to use this cloud migration. And I remember after I did it was on a Wednesday, just sitting in my car after I dropped the kids at school. It was like, wow, we pulled this off, and now what are they going to do with it? And we're starting to see that, and I couldn't foresee that. So think about some of those itches you want to scratch that you haven't been able to do before because it's on-prem. Yeah. Do this. Make that part of your case. Don't purely make it a shift from server and compute and then offloading that to Atlassian.
Yeah, and I remember actually when we were chatting about this because you talked about your CFO at the once we were getting towards the finishing contracting stages, right, which is that early beginning to middle kind of stage, said, wait, what happens if we stay where we are, right, and what happens if we do nothing? So how should people think about that when they're thinking about justification? Yeah,
so we this is the thing, right? So we had this strategy about moving out of our data centers and moving to SaaS. And when we were coming to the end of about to sign the deal, and you cutely remember us doing that, was our CFO said, Greg, I haven't yet seen anything that says, what if we do nothing? Like, just keep doing the same thing. Now, I mentioned we could have just moved into AWS, kept self-hosted, but effectively what we've done is just change the color of the car from white to yellow. We haven't done any improvement. And so we did the numbers and worked out that it was going to be more expensive. And that made it really easy for our CFO, right, on the financial side. But time again, if I'd said, okay, we do nothing, we're also going to miss out on all of these productivity improvements. Like, it's well and truly in the millions of dollars. Like, just with one of those services I mentioned. And as our teams keep building on that, we're building our platform with considerable automation for our own customers. And so that is the other piece of the business case. That's purely not just licensing and apps.
Mm-hmm. With that, we'll wrap. Greg, thank you so much for joining me on stage today, and thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.